Adriana Vale was worth $8 billion, but tonight she sat in a greasy 24-hour diner wearing a $13 blouse that scratched her skin like punishment. To every man she dated, she had never been a woman, only a bank account with lipstick. So she invented Nora Lane, a broke receptionist drowning in medical debt, and watched 34 blind dates vanish the moment they thought she had nothing to offer. Then Dorian Hayes walked in, late, exhausted, smelling of rain, motor oil, and cheap detergent, apologizing like keeping her waiting was the worst thing he had done all year. He was a single father so poor he checked the prices before reading the menu, so hungry his stomach betrayed him. Yet when Nora whispered that she was scared to look at her bank account, he did not run. He understood. And when the $9 bill came, he pulled crumpled singles and quarters from his worn wallet to pay for her meal. Adriana could have bought the entire diner before sunrise, but instead she watched him sacrifice what little he had. Now the question was no longer whether he would pass her test, but whether he would forgive her when he learned the truth. Adriana Vale had built an empire out of cold numbers, broken promises, and the kind of silence that made powerful men sit straighter when she entered a room. At 32, she owned Vale Meridian Freight, one of the largest private logistics companies in the country, a machine of steel warehouses, cargo planes, shipping contracts, and overnight routes that moved half the things people bought without ever knowing her name. To the public, she was brilliant. To her employees, she was untouchable. To investors, she was a miracle in tailored wool. But to Adriana herself, every morning felt like stepping into a glass tower she had built as a fortress and accidentally turned into a prison. The 46th floor boardroom smelled of filtered air, expensive coffee, polished wood, and fear. Around the long mahogany table, executives in perfect suits waited for her smallest nod before daring to breathe too loudly. Graham Ellis, her chief financial officer, stood beside a glowing screen filled with projections, expansion models, and profit margins, explaining why the Midwest distribution corridor could increase quarterly revenue by 12% if they reduced maintenance costs in several older contracts. Adriana listened without listening. Her face remained calm, unreadable, beautiful in a way that looked almost engineered. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, sleek black hair pulled back with surgical precision, a white silk blouse beneath a charcoal blazer that cost more than some people's rent. Graham kept glancing at her, measuring every flicker of her expression, waiting to see whether he should continue retreat flatter her or pretend the idea had never been his. Adriana knew that look too well. Everyone looked at her that way. Men on dates looked at her that way after they discovered her net worth. Journalists looked at her that way when they wanted a quote about female power. Charities looked at her that way when they wanted a check. Even old family friends, the few who had survived her father's collapse and her rise afterward, no longer spoke to her like a woman. They spoke to her like a vault with a heartbeat. "Enough," she said, cutting Graham off mid-sentence. The word was quiet, but the room went still, as if someone had pulled the oxygen out. Graham blinked. "Of course. I can send the remaining appendix by email." "Do that," Adriana replied, "and remove the phrase human efficiency adjustment from the proposal. It means firing people. If we are going to be ruthless, we will at least be honest." A nervous cough passed through the room. No one laughed. No one agreed. They simply waited until she stood, because when Adriana Vale stood, meetings ended. She walked out without looking back, her heels striking the marble floor with a rhythm so controlled it sounded like a verdict. In her private suite, behind a door only 3 people in the company could open, the woman the world feared disappeared. The blazer came off first, then the silk blouse, then the diamond studs her assistant had once called understated, even though they could have paid for a year of daycare. Adriana opened the bottom drawer of her wardrobe and pulled out a mustard-yellow polyester blouse sealed in a wrinkled grocery bag. The fabric was cheap, stiff, and already carried the faint smell of detergent from a laundromat she had visited only once for the sake of the disguise. She put it on and felt the rough tag bite at the back of her neck. Then came the black flats with cardboard showing through one heel, The faded purse with cracked faux leather, the old prepaid phone with a spiderweb fracture across the screen. She wiped the expensive foundation from her face until her skin looked uneven and tired, twisted her polished hair into an awkward claw clip, and studied herself in the mirror. Adriana Vale was gone. Nora Lane stood there instead, 29, underpaid, overdrawn, ordinary, invisible. Nora was the name she used when she wanted to know what kind of man remained after money was removed from the room. It had begun 6 months earlier, after a dinner with a handsome venture capitalist who had spoken tenderly about wanting a simple life, then asked 3 questions about her company valuation before the appetizers arrived. After that came a divorced surgeon who admired her independence until he asked whether she would ever consider investing in private medical technology. Then a charming real estate developer who kissed her hand and later emailed her assistant a proposal. 34 blind dates, 34 disappointments. When she dressed as Adriana, men leaned forward. When she dressed as Nora and mentioned medical debt, unpaid rent, or a failing bank account, they leaned back. Some were polite. Some were cruel. Some vanished so quickly it was almost funny. Date number 34 had left her with the bill for his macchiato after she told him she might be evicted. Adriana had told herself the experiment was practical, even necessary. Her therapist had called it self-protection turned into a weapon. Adriana preferred to call it quality control. That evening, date number 35 was waiting at a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district, a place she had chosen because nothing about it could be mistaken for luxury. She left through the service elevator, ignored the message from her driver asking whether she needed the car brought around, and walked 3 blocks to the subway. Down there, beneath the polished city, the air was humid and metallic, thick with wet concrete, old newspapers, and bodies pressed too close together. No one recognized her. No one softened their voice. No one angled for a favor. A man with paint on his boots bumped her shoulder and did not apologize. A tired nurse slept standing up with one hand around the pole. For 20 minutes, Adriana was no one, and the strange freedom of that nearly frightened her. By the time she reached the diner, the sky had turned the color of dirty steel, and a thin mist clung to the streetlights. The bell over the door rattled when she entered. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over cracked red vinyl booths, sticky laminate tables, and a counter where 2 truckers ate in silence beneath a television no one watched. The smell of burnt oil, weak coffee, and bleach wrapped around her like a dare. Adriana slid into a booth near the back, ordered black coffee, and rehearsed the story she had used before Nora Lane receptionist at a dental office hours recently cut medical debt from a broken ankle. 2 roommates, no savings, pretending not to panic. She expected the usual. A man would arrive, smile, ask a few questions, realize she was not useful, and begin searching for the exit with his eyes. The door rattled again. Dorian Hayes stepped inside as if the night had thrown him there. He looked around quickly, almost desperately, then spotted her and hurried over. He was not polished. He was not smooth. His gray Henley was faded damp at the collar and stretched from too many washes. His jeans were worn white at the knees. His hands were large and rough with grease caught in the lines of his knuckles no soap could fully erase. But it was his face that made Adriana forget her opening line. He was handsome in a tired, unguarded way, with a strong jaw, kind eyes shadowed purple from lack of sleep, and the expression of a man who had spent years arriving late to his own needs. "Nora?" he asked, breathless. "Yes," Adriana said, lifting her voice into something softer, smaller. "I'm Nora. I am so sorry," he said, sliding into the booth only after she nodded. "The babysitter canceled 20 minutes before I had to leave, and my neighbor, Mrs. Marin, she helped, but she can't hear the doorbell, so I had to make sure my daughter knew how to call me if anything happened, and then the bus was late." "None of that is your fault. I'm sorry. I hate making people wait." The apology was so sincere that Adriana found herself studying him with suspicion. Men apologized to her all the time, but usually because they feared consequences. Dorian looked pained because he believed he had failed at courtesy. It's fine, she said. Really. He picked up the menu, then paused when her eyes caught on one word. Daughter. His shoulders stiffened at once. The change was small but unmistakable, like a man bracing before a familiar blow. Yeah, he said carefully. Lila. She's 4. I put it in my profile, but it was near the bottom, so maybe you didn't see it. If that's a problem, I understand. There it was, the expectation of rejection. Adriana had seen men flinch before, but usually from embarrassment or pride. Dorian flinched like someone used to being left for telling the truth. Something in her chest tightened, irritating and sharp. I missed it, she said quietly. But Lila is a beautiful name. The relief that passed over his face was so raw she had to look down at her coffee. She's a beautiful kid, he said, a tired smile breaking through. Also a tiny dictator. This morning she cried because I gave her the blue cup after she asked for the blue cup. Apparently there are different kinds of blue. Against her will, Adriana almost laughed. The waitress came by, gum cracking between her teeth, and Dorian lowered his eyes to the menu. Adriana watched him read the prices before he read the food. His gaze moved with the silent arithmetic of survival, coffee fries, tax, tip, bus fare tomorrow. She knew that calculation. She had watched her father do it when she was 14 after his company collapsed, and creditors called the house so often her mother unplugged the phone. Poverty had a posture. It curved the shoulders, narrowed the appetite, turned every menu into a threat. Just coffee, Dorian said, and maybe a side of fries. His stomach betrayed him with a hollow growl loud enough for both of them to hear. A flush climbed his neck. Adriana felt the polyester tag scrape her skin like an accusation. Same for me, she said quickly. I'm not hungry either. Dorian looked at her, not fooled. You don't have to order small because I did. I'm not, she lied. Then she leaned forward and began the test. Honestly, I probably shouldn't be eating out anyway. Things have been tight. Dorian's expression changed, but not into disgust. It became recognition. Rough month, he asked gently. Adriana lowered her eyes. Rough year, medical bills, my hours got cut. I'm scared to check my bank account most mornings. She waited for his body to shift away for the careful retreat for disappointment to cool his voice. Instead, Dorian rested his grease-stained knuckles on the table near hers, not touching, only close enough to say he understood. That feeling is awful, he said. Like your chest never opens all the way because the math is sitting on it. Adriana forgot for one dangerous second that she was acting. How do you live with it? You don't look at the whole disaster, he said. You look at the next piece. Rent, groceries, gas, daycare. You cut the monster into smaller monsters and fight the one closest to your face. The fries arrived hot and salty between them, and Dorian pushed the ketchup toward her before taking any for himself. They began to talk, and the conversation moved with a strange ease that made Adriana uneasy. He told her about fixing boilers in public schools, about children sitting in classrooms wearing coats because the heat failed again, about clogged sinks, leaking ceilings, and teachers buying supplies with their own money. He told her about Lila asking whether princesses could live in apartments with broken radiators, and how he had said yes, because sometimes princesses had brave fathers who were still learning how to build castles. Adriana listened while the lie inside her grew heavier. She had Foundation's gala photos, speeches about opportunity. Yet Dorian, with his empty stomach and worn wallet, sounded closer to Mercy than she had ever been. The first real difficulty did not come from the test she had planned. It came from the man she had chosen to test. Because every minute Dorian stayed, every honest word he offered made Adriana feel less like a clever woman protecting herself and more like a coward playing poor in front of someone who had no costume to remove. The longer Adriana sat across from Dorian Hayes, the more her little experiment began to feel like something rotten sitting between them on the sticky diner table. For 6 months, pretending to be Nora Lane had given her a cruel kind of comfort. Every man who walked away had confirmed what she already believed, that people were selfish, that love was a transaction, that kindness disappeared the moment it became inconvenient. But Dorian did not walk away. He stayed. Worse than that, he listened. He did not treat her fake hardship like an awkward disease. He treated it like a language he understood too well. When she described being afraid to check her bank account, he did not offer empty encouragement or turn the conversation toward himself. He looked at her with a quiet, painful recognition and told her that fear had weight that it sat on the chest and made breathing feel expensive. Adriana nodded as Nora, but inside she felt the first fracture in the armor she had spent years building. Dorian was not performing compassion. He was giving away something he barely had left. The fries between them grew cold, the coffee turned bitter, and the diner slowly emptied around them until only a few lonely truckers and sleepless strangers remained under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dorian spoke about his daughter Lila, with the exhausted devotion of a man whose entire world fit into one small child's lunchbox, one daycare bill, one fever at midnight, one cracked plastic cup she insisted was royal because she was 4 and still believed ordinary things could become magical if someone loved them enough. He told Adriana how Lila liked to wear paper crowns, how she called the broken-down Honda her carriage, how she asked every night whether tomorrow would be a good day before she fell asleep. "I always tell her yes," he said, smiling faintly into his coffee, "even when I'm not sure how I'm going to make it one." Adriana felt that sentence land somewhere deep inside her, deeper than she wanted it to. She thought of her own childhood of standing barefoot in a kitchen while her father stared at bills with trembling hands, of hearing her mother whisper that children should not have to see a grown man break. She had spent her entire adult life making sure she would never be that powerless again. She had built warehouses, bought trucks, outmaneuvered bankers, crushed competitors, and turned her name into something men said carefully. Yet sitting across from Dorian, she saw a kind of strength she had never been able to purchase, the strength to remain gentle while drowning. When the waitress finally came with the check and dropped it face down in a wet ring of condensation, the fragile warmth between them changed at once. Adriana felt it immediately. This was supposed to be the final moment of the test, the part where the truth of a man revealed itself. She had watched 34 men fail here in different ways. Some became irritated. Some suddenly remembered early meetings. Some joked about splitting everything equally and then ordered the most expensive item on the menu. Adriana reached for the check out of habit, ready to play her part, ready to say she could cover her half even though she had already planted the idea that Nora could barely afford to be there. But Dorian's hand moved first. He caught the edge of the paper and pulled it toward himself. "I've got it," he said. "Dorian, no," she replied softly, forcing Nora's nervousness into her voice. "We can split it." "You told me you were scared to look at your account," he said. "I ask you here. This one is on me." Adriana should have stopped him then. A decent person would have stopped him. She had a black titanium card in her purse that could have paid for every meal served in that diner for a year. She could have bought the building, doubled the waitress's salary, replaced every cracked booth by morning, and forgotten the expense before breakfast. But the old suspicious part of her wanted to see it through. The part of her that had been betrayed, flattered, hunted, and used wanted proof so badly that it pushed against her conscience like a hand over a mouth. "But you have Lila," she said, and even as she said it, shame heated her throat. "You need that money more than I do." Dorian looked down at the check. It was only $9 and some change, but Adriana saw his face change as he calculated what $9 meant in his world. Gas, milk, daycare snacks, a little space between one problem and the next. He reached for his wallet, old leather soft from years of use, and opened it with no drama, no masculine pride, no desire to impress. He simply counted out a $5 bill, 4 wrinkled singles, and a few quarters for the tip. He smoothed the bills carefully on the table as if respect could be folded back into them. Adriana's stomach turned. The sight of those crushed dollars hurt more than any insult she had ever received in a boardroom. This was not a man trying to buy admiration. This was a man honoring a promise with money he could not easily spare. "Thank you," she whispered. and the words tasted like theft. Dorian smiled, tired but sincere. Fry by fry right. That was the moment the test ended, though Dorian did not know it. It did not end because he had passed. It ended because Adriana finally understood that she had failed. She had dressed poverty around herself like a costume, but he wore sacrifice in his bones. When they stepped outside, the night had turned colder, and a thin rain silvered the pavement beneath the streetlights. Dorian frowned at the empty industrial street and asked where her car was. Adriana lied again, though the lie felt heavier now. "I took the bus." "Then I'll drive you," he said at once. "This isn't a great area and it's late." She should have refused. She should have let him go home to Lila, should have called her driver and ended the damage there. Instead, she followed him to the old Honda parked under a flickering lamp. The car looked as tired as he did, its hood peeling rear bumper tied with zip cords, one window sealed at the edge with tape. Yet Dorian opened the passenger door for her as if it were a limousine, brushing crumbs from the seat with embarrassed care. When Adriana sat down, her shoe nudged something on the floor. A tiny plastic tiara slid against her heel, pink, sticky, missing several rhinestones. She picked it up slowly. Dorian saw it and gave a sheepish laugh as he started the engine. "That belongs to Queen Lila I. She leaves her royal jewels everywhere." Adriana stared at the cheap crown in her lap while the heater coughed dusty air onto her knees. The tiara weighed almost nothing, but in her hands it felt unbearable. It belonged to a little girl whose father had just given away grocery money to help a stranger who was not really poor, not really trapped, not really Nora. The truth pressed against Adriana's ribs until breathing hurt. Outside, the rain blurred the windshield. Inside, Dorian asked gently, "Where to?" Adriana opened her mouth, but no address came out. She saw the worn wallet, the tired hands on the steering wheel, the plastic crown in her lap, and for the first time in years, she could not hide behind strategy. "Pull over," she said. Her voice came out lower, firmer, more like Adriana Vale than Nora Lane. Dorian glanced at her confused. "Here. We're on the overpass. Please." Something in her tone made him obey. He guided the Honda onto the shoulder gravel, crunching beneath the tires, and put it in park. The car trembled around them. "Are you okay?" he asked. That concern almost broke her. "My name isn't Nora," she said, staring at the windshield wipers. "It's Adriana. Adriana Vale." He blinked, waiting for more, the name meaning nothing to him yet. She forced herself to continue. "I don't have medical debt. I don't work at a dental office. I don't live with roommates. I didn't take the bus because I had no other choice. My driver is 3 blocks away in a Maybach tracking this phone in case I need him." Silence filled the car so completely that even the rain seemed to quiet. Dorian leaned back. "What are you talking about?" Adriana turned to him, stripped bare by her own confession. "I'm wealthy, Dorian. Very wealthy. I own Vale Meridian Freight. I've been on 34 blind dates where men wanted my money before they wanted me. So I started doing this, dressing like someone broke, telling them I was drowning. I wanted to know who would stay when there was nothing to gain." Dorian did not shout at first. His face simply emptied. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by something colder than anger, humiliation. "A test," he said. Adriana swallowed. "Yes." His gaze dropped to the wallet between them, then to the tiara in her hands. "I bought your dinner. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I can pay you back. I can—" "You watched me count singles," he said, his voice shaking now. "You sat there in a fake cheap shirt and watched me count quarters like it was part of your little lesson. I didn't know you would be like this." "Like what?" he snapped. "Real." The word hit her harder than shouting. Dorian gripped the steering wheel, breathing fast. $9 is gas. $9 is milk. $9 is Lila's daycare craft fee. I gave it to you because I thought you were in the same storm, but you weren't. You were standing on a yacht watching me paddle." Tears burned Adriana's eyes, but she knew she had no right to use them. I wanted to protect myself, she said. No, Dorian replied, reaching across her to push open the passenger door. Cold rain rushed into the car. You wanted proof that everyone was worse than you. Get out. Adriana stared at him. Dorian, please. Get out of my car, Adriana. This time he used her real name like a locked door. She stepped into the rain with Lila's tiara still clutched in her hand. The Honda pulled away, its red taillights fading into the wet dark, and Adriana stood alone on the shoulder until her Maybach arrived. When she sank into the heated leather seat minutes later, surrounded by wealth, silence, and safety, she looked down at the broken plastic crown and understood the decision waiting for her. She could bury this night, return to her tower, and call the pain a failed experiment. Or she could admit that Dorian had not exposed the ugliness of the world. He had exposed the emptiness in her. For the first time, Adriana did not want to be right. She wanted to become worthy of being forgiven. By the next morning, Adriana Vale discovered that guilt did not behave like any problem she had ever solved. In business, a crisis could be divided into categories: financial exposure, reputational risk, legal liability, operational failure. You gathered data, isolated the weakness, assigned responsibility, and moved money or people until the machine ran again. But Dorian Hayes was not a failed machine. He was not a hostile investor, not a broken contract, not a competitor to be outmaneuvered. He was a man she had humiliated with her arrogance, and no amount of strategy could erase the image of him smoothing crumpled dollar bills on a diner table while she sat across from him with unlimited wealth hidden in her purse. She arrived at the office before sunrise, still carrying Lila's broken plastic tiara in the pocket of her wool coat. The tower was quiet at that hour, the marble lobby too polished, the elevators too silent, the private floor too perfectly insulated from the city below. Normally, that insulation comforted her. That morning, it made her feel sick. She walked into her office, placed the tiara beside her crystal water glass, and stared at it as the city turned pale beyond the windows. It looked absurd there, sticky and cheap and missing 3 rhinestones, surrounded by Italian leather glass awards and framed magazine covers calling her fearless. Fearless, she thought bitterly, had been an easy word for people who never saw her hiding inside costumes. For the first time, she understood that money had not made her brave. It had only made her harder to reach. When Graham Ellis entered at 8 with his usual stack of reports, he stopped at the sight of the little crown on her desk. Is that some kind of charity item? He asked, half amused, half cautious. Adriana looked up slowly. No. The answer was cold enough to wipe the smile from his face. She opened the Midwest expansion proposal he had sent the night before and pushed it back across the desk. Freeze this. Graham blinked. Freeze the expansion. For this quarter. Adriana, we have already signaled growth to the board. Delaying the corridor sends the wrong message. Then send a better one. She stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the early traffic pulsing through the city. Somewhere far below, people were riding buses to jobs that did not pay enough, carrying lunch in plastic bags, counting dollars hoping the next bill would wait. Dorian lived in that city. Lila lived in that city. Children sat in classrooms with broken heaters while she debated expansion margins under filtered air. I want a full assessment of deferred maintenance in the South Side Public School District, she said. Boilers, roofs, plumbing, electrical, classroom heating, cafeteria equipment, accessibility repairs. Everything. Graham frowned. Why? Because we are going to pay for it. He actually laughed once, thinking she had made a dry joke. When she did not turn around, his laugh died. Adriana, that is a municipal responsibility. We can sponsor a program, perhaps donate supplies, attach the foundation name, make it a clean press story, but fully funding infrastructure repair would be millions in sunk cost. Good, good. Yes, good. We have millions. Graham's face tightened. That is not how capital allocation works. Adriana turned back then, and the old boardroom steel returned to her voice. No, Graham. That is not how hiding behind capital allocation works. Draft the initiative, Make it anonymous. No gala, no speeches, no photographs of me shaking hands with grateful principals. No naming rights, no press release. If my name appears anywhere near it, you will be looking for work by lunch." Graham stared at her with the careful alarm of a man watching a machine behave unpredictably.
"May I ask what prompted this?"
Adriana's fingers moved unconsciously to the tiara. No, that should have been the beginning of repair. Instead, it became the beginning of another test. By noon, her legal team had identified the repair backlog. By 3, her foundation director had called the plan unprecedented but possible. By 6, the first transfer had been authorized through a layered donor structure designed to keep Vale Meridian invisible. For a few hours, Adriana allowed herself to believe she had finally done one clean thing. It would not win Dorian's forgiveness, and it did not deserve to, but children would be warmer because of it. That mattered. Then the unexpected happened. At 7:42 p.m., while Adriana sat alone in her office drafting and deleting the same apology to Dorian for the 17th time, her assistant knocked once and stepped inside without waiting. Her face was pale. "You need to see this." She placed a tablet on the desk. A local business blog had published a headline that made Adriana's blood turn cold. "Billionaire CEO secretly funds Southside school repairs after date with single dad maintenance worker." Beneath it was a blurred photograph taken from outside the diner, showing Adriana in the mustard blouse sitting across from Dorian. Another showed Dorian's Honda near the overpass. The article was ugly, speculative, and cruel. It suggested Adriana had been slumming for romance, that the donation was an attempt to impress a working-class single father, that Vale Meridian's sudden interest in Southside schools had a personal motivation. Dorian's name was not in the headline, but it appeared in the third paragraph. His job, his school district, his daughter's age, enough details for people to find him. Adriana felt the room tilt. "Who leaked this?" she asked. Her assistant swallowed. "We don't know yet." But Adriana knew. Not with proof, not yet, but with instinct sharpened by years of betrayal. Graham had questioned the expense. Graham had always believed every act of giving needed a branding strategy. If he could not stop the donation, perhaps he had decided to make it useful or punish her for making it private. Within minutes, social media had begun doing what it did best, turning human pain into entertainment. Strangers called Dorian a gold digger. Others called Adriana manipulative. Some praised the donation without caring who had been exposed. A few posted jokes about single dads finally finding sugar queens. Adriana read until nausea rose in her throat. She had tried to fix what she broke, and somehow she had broken it wider. Her first instinct was command. Sue the blog, threaten the platforms, fire whoever leaked, control the narrative. But then she imagined Dorian seeing the article while standing in a school hallway with a wrench in his hand. Imagined coworkers whispering, imagined Lila someday finding her father's humiliation preserved online. Control would protect Adriana's name first. Repair had to protect Dorian. She called legal and ordered them to pursue the leak quietly, but not to issue a statement without her approval. Then she called the foundation director and demanded that every document related to the school repairs be scrubbed of personal implication. "The repairs continue," she said, "no matter what happens to me." After that, she did what frightened her most. She searched the school district directory, found the Southside Elementary where Dorian worked that evening, and drove there herself, refusing the Maybach, refusing the driver, refusing another layer of distance. She took one company sedan from the garage and sat behind the wheel like a woman relearning the shape of accountability. Rain had returned by the time she reached the red brick school, tapping softly against the windshield. Reporters were not there yet, thank God, but 2 district employees stood near the side entrance looking at their phones and talking too quietly. Adriana parked half a block away and walked through the wet evening without an umbrella. Inside the building smelled of floor wax, old paper bleach, and tired heat struggling through old vents. She followed the sound of metal striking metal until she found Dorian kneeling beneath a broken drinking fountain, sleeves pushed up, hands dark with grease. For 1 second, she simply watched him work. He looked smaller than he had in the diner, not physically, but surrounded by a building that seemed to need more from him than one man could give. "Dorian," she said. The wrench stopped. His shoulders locked. Slowly, he stood and turned. If anger had burned in his eyes on the overpass, now there was something worse, exhaustion sharpened by public shame. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know. Do you?" He pulled out his phone, opened the article, and held it up between them. "Because this says you are here whether you walk through the door or not." Adriana stepped closer, then stopped when his expression warned her not to. "I did not leak that, but it happened because of you." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. "My boss asked me today if I was going to quit now that I had billionaire attention. A teacher joked that maybe I could get the cafeteria fixed if I went on a second date." Two parents stared at me in the parking lot like I had sold my kid for a donation. "So tell me, Adriana, which part of this is supposed to feel anonymous?" Shame closed around her throat. "None of it. I wanted the repairs anonymous. I gave the order. Someone betrayed that." "Welcome to the feeling," Dorian said. She deserved that. She accepted it without flinching. "I'm going to find out who leaked it. I'm going to stop the story from spreading as much as I can. But I came here because I didn't want you hearing an apology through a lawyer or a statement." Dorian laughed, once bitter and tired. "An apology does not unring a bell." "No," she said, "it doesn't." For the first time in her life, Adriana did not reach for power. She did not offer money. She did not promise to fix everything by morning. She only stood in the harsh hallway light and told the truth. "I thought funding the repairs would be a first step. It was still too easy. It was me moving money from a safe distance. I understand that now." Dorian studied her guarded, wounded, still impossible to read. "Then what are you doing?" Adriana looked at the toolbox beside him, at the old pipes at the school walls with chipped paint, at the man whose dignity had survived poverty but had been bruised by her pride. "I'm asking what repair looks like from where you stand," she said. "Not from my office, not from my guilt, from here." Dorian did not answer right away. Somewhere down the hall, a radiator knocked loudly, then hissed. The building itself seemed to be waiting. Finally, he picked up his wrench and turned back toward the fountain. "Repair starts with not making yourself the center of the damage," he said. "If you really want to help stop chasing forgiveness and make sure those kids get heat whether I ever speak to you again or not." Adriana absorbed the blow because it was also a lesson. "Okay," she whispered. "Then that's where I'll start." And for the first time, her plan to fix the conflict was no longer about earning back Dorian's warmth. It was about becoming the kind of woman who would have deserved his kindness before she ever asked for it. Adriana Vale had spent most of her adult life believing transformation was something that happened when a person gained power. But in the weeks after the article spread through the city, she learned that real transformation began when power no longer protected you from shame. The leak could have been handled the old way. Her lawyers could have buried the blog under threats. Her public relations team could have turned the story into a glossy redemption campaign. And Graham Ellis could have crafted a statement about community partnership that made everyone forget a working man had been humiliated in the process. That was what the old Adriana would have done. She would have controlled the room, controlled the headline, controlled the damage, and called it leadership. Instead, for the first time, she let the damage speak. The internal investigation proved what she had already suspected. Graham had not personally handed the story to the blog, but he had made one carefully worded call to a consultant who had spoken to a donor contact who had spoken to a reporter hungry for a scandal involving money, poverty, and romance. Graham called it unfortunate information drift when he sat across from her in the boardroom with sweat shining at his temples. Adriana listened without interrupting, her hands folded on the table, Lila's plastic tiara beside her notebook. When he finished explaining how anonymous generosity had limited strategic value without visibility, she looked at him and saw a version of herself she could no longer tolerate. Polished, intelligent, efficient, and morally hollow. "You turned children's heat into leverage," she said. Graham straightened. "I protected shareholder perception." "No," Adriana said. "You protected the only language you understand." She fired him before lunch, not because firing him would fix what happened, but because keeping him would prove she had learned nothing. Yet even that decision gave her no relief. Dorian's face stayed with her, tired, wounded, unsurprised. "Welcome to the feeling," he had said, and those words followed her everywhere. They followed her into meetings with district administrators where she refused camera requests. They followed her into legal calls where she ordered her team to remove every mention of Dorian Hayes from takedown notices so he would not become even more searchable. They followed her home at night where her penthouse windows reflected a woman who owned everything except peace. When her PR director begged her to issue a polished statement, Adriana wrote her own. It was short, plain, and more frightening than any hostile acquisition she had ever faced. She admitted that she had disguised herself on blind dates because of her mistrust. She admitted that her actions had hurt someone who had shown her undeserved kindness. She did not name Dorian, did not mention his daughter, did not describe the diner, and did not ask to be praised for funding the school repairs. "The harm was mine," the statement ended. "The repair should not become my spotlight." The response was messy. Some people admired her honesty, others mocked it. Investors privately complained that she sounded unstable. Lifestyle pages called her the billionaire who played poor and got caught. For the first time, Adriana did not chase every opinion like a threat. She let the noise exist. Then she went back to the work that did not photograph well. The Southside repair project began with assessments, permits, emergency heating units, and crews who wanted signatures at every step. Adriana attended meetings quietly, sitting in plastic chairs under flickering lights, while principals explained which classrooms were coldest in the morning and which cafeteria freezer failed twice a month. She listened more than she spoke. When a district official tried to thank her publicly, she corrected him. "Thank the maintenance staff," she said. "They kept these buildings alive long before I knew how broken they were." Those words reached Dorian before she did. He heard them from a custodian named Paul, who had watched Adriana stand in a boiler room wearing steel-toed boots that were clearly new and asking a contractor why the temporary heaters had not arrived. Paul laughed when he told the story, not unkindly. "She didn't know a pipe wrench from a garden rake," he said, "but she didn't act like she did. That counts for something." Dorian did not answer. He wanted to dismiss it. Wanting to believe in Adriana again felt dangerous, almost irresponsible. Forgiveness was not a luxury he could afford carelessly. He had Lila to think about. Since the article, he had become more protective than ever, walking faster through the parking lot, ignoring whispers, changing his social media settings, asking Mrs. Marin not to answer questions from strangers. Lila was too young to understand why her father looked tired in a different way now, but children felt storms, even when adults hid the thunder. One evening, while eating cereal at their tiny kitchen table, she asked Daddy, "Did the lady with the shiny car make you sad?" Dorian froze with the spoon halfway to his mouth. He had never told her about the Maybach. He realized then that pain leaked through walls, through silence, through the way he washed dishes too hard. "She made a mistake," he said carefully. Lila considered this with the solemnity only a 4-year-old could manage. "Do people get to say sorry?" Dorian looked at his daughter, at the gap where a baby tooth would someday loosen at the paper crown she had taped crookedly to her curls. "They get to say it," he replied. "Then they have to show it." The next week, the first boiler replacement began at Southside Elementary. It should have been a technical day, nothing more, but a problem erupted before noon. A contractor discovered asbestos insulation near an old pipe chase, and the repair schedule came to a halt. Parents were angry. Teachers were exhausted. The district wanted to delay everything until the following quarter. Adriana arrived within an hour, not with a camera crew, not with a speech, but with environmental specialists, emergency funding approval, and a willingness to stand in a hallway while angry parents demanded answers. Dorian watched from a distance, arms crossed, expecting the CEO mask to return. But Adriana did not become cold. She did not hide behind staff. When a mother accused her of using their school to clean her conscience, Adriana simply said, "You may be right to question my motives, but your children still deserve safe classrooms, and I am not leaving until the solution is funded." The mother stared at her, disarmed by the lack of defensiveness. Dorian was disarmed too. The old Adriana would have won the argument. This Adriana absorbed it. By evening, a temporary relocation plan had been arranged for 2 classrooms. Portable heaters had been delivered for unaffected sections, and the asbestos removal had been scheduled without cutting into the repair budget. Dorian stayed late to help move desks. He expected Adriana to leave once the crisis was handled, but she remained awkwardly carrying stacks of plastic chairs in her expensive coat until one of the teachers told her to take it off before she ruined it. She did. Underneath her blouse, wrinkled, her hair loosened from its perfect twist, and a smear of dust appeared along her cheek. Dorian saw her struggling with a chair that had snagged on a doorframe and, despite himself, stepped forward. "Turn it sideways," he said. She looked up, surprised by his voice. For a second, both of them stood frozen in the doorway, surrounded by desks, cardboard boxes, and the hum of temporary heaters. "Thank you," she said. No apology, no plea, no attempt to stretch the moment into something emotional. Just, "Thank you." Dorian nodded and took the heavier end. They carried the chair together down the hall. It was the first thing they had done side by side since the night in the Honda, and the simplicity of it made Adriana's chest ache. After the last classroom was moved, Dorian found her outside near the loading area, sitting on the edge of a low concrete wall, rubbing a red mark on her palm where the chair had pinched her skin. The schoolyard was damp from earlier rain, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and sawdust. "You didn't have to stay," he said. Adriana looked at him, then back at her hand. "I know. That wasn't a compliment. I know that too." A faint silence settled between them, not warm yet, but no longer entirely hostile. Dorian leaned against the wall a few feet away. "Lila asked about you." Adriana's breath caught. "She did. Not by name. She called you the lady with the shiny car." Shame flickered across Adriana's face before she could hide it. "I'm sorry she felt any of this. She feels what I carry," Dorian said. "That's why I can't afford chaos." Adriana nodded. "I understand." "Do you?" he asked. But this time the question was not a blade. It was a door barely cracked open. Adriana chose her answer carefully because she knew one wrong word could close it. "Not fully. I don't know what it's like to raise a child alone. I don't know what it's like to decide between gas and groceries. I don't know what it's like to be exposed by someone else's money and still have to show up for work the next day. But I know I caused harm because I was afraid of being used. And I know fear does not excuse cruelty." Dorian looked at her for a long time. The parking lot lights reflected in his tired eyes. "You keep saying the right things. I'm trying to do the right things. That takes longer. Then I'll take longer." The answer was quiet, but it had weight. Dorian pushed off the wall and reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Adriana thought he was leaving. Instead, he pulled out the plastic tiara. He must have taken it back from his toolbox after she left it at the school. One of the missing rhinestones had been replaced with a tiny blue sticker shaped like a star. "Lila fixed it," he said. Adriana stared at the crown, her throat tightening. "It looks better," she said. "Broken royal things still count." A fragile smile touched his mouth, there and gone. Adriana laughed softly, but her eyes shone. "She sounds wise." "She's 4. Wisdom comes and goes." He held the tiara for another moment, then tucked it away again. He was not giving it to her, not yet. But he had shown it to her. Somehow that felt like more than forgiveness. It felt like permission to keep becoming. "There's a coffee cart 2 blocks from here," he said at last. "I know," Adriana replied. "4th and Elm. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking you to, and you're paying." This time her laugh was steadier, warmer, less like a sob and more like breath returning. "I'm paying." They walked toward the street together, not touching, not healed, not pretending the wound had vanished. But the distance between them had changed. It was no longer a wall built from betrayal. It was a road, narrow and difficult, with room for two people to take one honest step at a time. The coffee cart on 4th and Elm was nothing like the places Adriana Vale had once chosen for dates, and that was exactly why it mattered. It had no polished marble, no white tablecloths, no sommelier waiting to explain the emotional history of a bottle of wine, no private room where wealth could soften every awkward silence. It was only a silver cart parked beneath a leaning street lamp with a handwritten menu taped to the glass and steam rising into the cool evening air. Dorian stood beside it with his hands in the pockets of his work jacket, watching Adriana approach from the school parking lot. She had changed out of the expensive coat she had nearly ruined moving chairs, and now wore a simple dark sweater, her hair loosened by the long day, her face tired in a way that no longer looked like defeat. It looked human. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she replied. "I said there was a coffee cart." "That is not the same as an invitation." Then I took an optimistic interpretation. He almost smiled. Almost. The man behind the cart asked what they wanted, and for one small, awkward second they both looked at the prices. Dorian noticed her noticing and stiffened, but Adriana did not rush to perform guilt. She simply said, "2 coffees, please, and whatever pastry is still warm." Then she turned to Dorian. "Unless you hate pastries." "I don't hate pastries," he said. "I'm just suspicious of rich people using pastry as emotional leverage." This time the smile escaped him before he could stop it. It was small, tired, and guarded, but it warmed the space between them more than the coffee ever could. They sat on a nearby bench, the paper cups hot in their hands, traffic moving beyond them in soft streams of headlights. For a while they spoke about the school because the school was safer than the heart. Adriana told him the asbestos removal was fully covered, that the emergency heaters would remain until the new system passed inspection, that every contractor had signed a clause preventing publicity. Dorian listened, nodding, asking practical questions, correcting details when she misunderstood how things worked on the ground. She did not pretend to know more than him. She did not turn defensive when he challenged her. Each time he spoke, she listened like his knowledge had value, not because he had forgiven her, but because it did. That was one of the first clear signs that she had changed. The second came when her phone buzzed 3 times in a row and she turned it face down without looking. Dorian glanced at it. "Important, probably." "You're not checking." "I'm trying to learn the difference between urgent and important." He studied her for a moment, then looked away, his thumb tracing the seam of his coffee cup. "Lila wants to meet you." Adriana went still. The street seemed to quiet around her. "Dorian, are you sure?" "No," he said honestly. "I'm not sure about any of this. But she knows enough to be curious, and I don't want to teach her that people are only their worst mistake. I also don't want to teach her that apologies mean anything if they never come with changed behavior." Adriana swallowed hard. "I would be honored to meet her, but only when you decide it's right. Not because I want it, not because I'm sorry, because you believe it won't hurt her." Dorian looked at her then, really looked as if searching for the hidden angle he had once found too late. He did not find one. "Saturday," he said, "there's a community repair day at the school. Teachers, parents, maintenance staff, painting, cleaning, moving supplies. Lila will be there with Mrs. Marin for part of it. If you come to work. Not donate, not supervise, work." Adriana nodded. "I can work. Wear shoes you can ruin. I own shoes I can ruin now." That sentence still sounds expensive. She laughed. And this time Dorian did too, quietly, reluctantly, like laughter was a door he was not ready to open all the way, but did not want to lock anymore. Saturday arrived clear and bright with pale sunlight spilling over Southside Elementary and turning the old brick warmer than it had looked in years. Adriana arrived early, not in a company car but in her own plain sedan, wearing jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and boots already scuffed from walking through the boiler room earlier that week. For a moment, standing in the parking lot, she almost turned back. Not because she feared hard work, but because she feared the eyes. Parents knew who she was now. Teachers knew. Some would never trust her motives. Some would whisper. Some would think she was performing humility because public shame had forced her into it. The old Adriana would have hated being misunderstood. The new Adriana knew that being misunderstood was not the worst consequence. Hurting people was worse. Running from repair was worse. She walked in. The gym had been transformed into a supply station with paint cans, brushes, donated snacks, folding tables, and handwritten signs. Dorian was across the room helping a teacher stack boxes when he saw her. He did not wave dramatically. He gave one small nod, and somehow that was enough. Then a tiny voice near Adriana's knee said, "Are you the lady with the shiny car?" Adriana looked down and found Lila Hayes staring up at her with wide eyes, a paper crown taped crookedly over a puff of dark curls, one front tooth slightly chipped, purple paint already smeared on her sleeve. Adriana crouched slowly so she would not tower over her. "I was," she said, "but today I came in a very ordinary car." Lila considered this. "Daddy said you made a big mistake." Adriana felt several adults nearby go silent. She did not look away. "Your daddy was right. Did you say sorry? I did. Did you mean it?" Adriana's throat tightened. "Yes, but meaning it is only the beginning." Lila nodded with grave approval, then lifted a small sheet of stickers. "My crown broke, but I fixed it. You can have a star if you are helping." For 1 second, Adriana could not speak. Then she held out her hand and Lila carefully placed a blue star sticker on the back of it. Across the room, Dorian watched his expression unreadable, but his eyes softened in a way that made Adriana's chest ache. The day unfolded in sweat, dust, paint, and ordinary labor. Adriana taped classroom walls, carried boxes, scrubbed old marker stains from desks, and helped repaint a hallway that had not seen fresh color in a decade. She was clumsy at first, and a few parents watched her with open skepticism, but she did not complain, did not retreat, and did not act wounded when no one praised her. Near noon, the final crisis arrived, the one that would make every truth impossible to hide. Graham Ellis appeared at the school with 2 reporters and a camera operator wearing the wounded righteousness of a man who had decided revenge was just misunderstood justice. He stepped into the hallway where volunteers were painting and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Isn't this touching?" he said. "The billionaire plays janitor for a day and everyone forgets she manipulated a working father for entertainment." Dorian put down his paint roller at once. Adriana felt the hallway freeze. Graham smiled at the reporters. "You people should know the truth. This entire project exists because Adriana Vale lied to a poor man, embarrassed him, and then tried to purchase redemption with school repairs." Murmurs rose. Lila, frightened by the sudden tension, moved behind Mrs. Marin's leg. Dorian's jaw tightened, but before he could step forward, Adriana did. The old Adriana would have destroyed Graham with one sentence. She knew his severance violations, his leak, his vanity, his fear of irrelevance. She could have humiliated him in front of every camera there. Instead, she stood with paint on her sleeve, a blue star sticker on her hand, and said, "Some of what he said is true." The hallway went quiet again. Graham blinked, robbed of the fight he wanted. Adriana turned not to the cameras, but to the parents, teachers, volunteers, and Dorian. "I did lie. I disguised myself because I believed money made honest love impossible. I tested people instead of trusting them. A kind man treated me with dignity when he believed I had nothing, and I repaid that kindness by letting him become part of my fear. That was cruel. The repairs to this school do not erase it. They are not payment for forgiveness. They are simply something that should have been done because children deserve safe classrooms." One reporter asked, "So is this a redemption campaign?" Adriana looked directly at him. "No. Redemption is not a campaign. It is what you do when nobody applauds, and it belongs to the people you harmed to decide whether they believe it." Then she looked at Graham. You leaked private details about a father and his child to punish me. Legal consequences will follow. But today you are standing in a school hallway trying to turn children's safety into a spectacle. Leave." Graham laughed, but no one joined him. The parents who had doubted Adriana now stared at him with disgust. A teacher stepped aside and pointed toward the exit. Dorian walked forward, not violently, not dramatically, but with the steady presence of a man who had survived worse than rich men's games. "You heard her," he said. "Leave the school." Graham looked from him to the cameras, realized the story had turned against him, and walked out with the reporters trailing behind, hungry now for a different villain. When the doors closed, the silence remained for one breath, then two. Finally, Mrs. Marin clapped her hands and said, "Well, paint dries whether fools talk or not," and the hallway exhaled into nervous laughter. Work resumed, but something had shifted. Not fixed, not erased, shifted. Near sunset, the final classroom was finished. New heaters hummed softly. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Children's drawings had been taped along the hallway, and Lila's paper crown sat on Dorian's toolbox like a tiny flag of victory. Adriana stood near the doorway, exhausted and streaked with paint, watching Dorian lift Lila onto his hip. The little girl rested her head on his shoulder and whispered something that made him smile. Adriana turned to leave, not wanting to intrude on the family she had once endangered. "Adriana," Dorian called. She stopped. He walked toward her with Lila in his arms. "We're getting pancakes," he said. "A place near my apartment. Not fancy." "Pancakes are rarely fancy," Adriana said softly. "You'd be surprised what rich people can ruin." She smiled, but her eyes were wet. "Are you inviting me?" Dorian looked at Lila, then back at Adriana. "We are inviting you to pancakes. Not into everything, not all at once, but pancakes." Lila held out her repaired crown. "You can sit with us if you don't lie." Adriana laughed through the tears she no longer tried to hide. "I won't lie." Months later, people would remember the school repairs as the beginning of something good, but Adriana would remember the pancakes. She would remember sitting in a small booth while Lila poured too much syrup, while Dorian warned her that diner coffee was a test of character, while no one cared about her stock value, her board, or her name. Love did not arrive like a grand rescue. It arrived slowly in honest cups of coffee, in repaired heaters, in apologies repeated through action, in a child's sticker pressed onto a billionaire's hand. Adriana learned that family was not something money could buy its way into. It was something built through trust, protected by truth, and warmed by ordinary kindness. And Dorian learned that guarding his heart did not mean locking it forever. Sometimes love was not a person who arrived perfect. Sometimes love was someone who broke the truth, faced the cost, stayed to repair what they could, and chose day after day never to hide again.